Like when you know that you have an issue with forgiveness and you have an off with somebody, it's important to take action and not wait. Human nature likes to hold on to grudges and hold on to, well, until you acknowledge that you hurt me. And, some of that, you will never get to the bottom of it. Sometimes you just have to let go and forgive and love unconditionally. And after all, that's how God loves us, doesn't he?
Welcome to the Crown Yourself podcast, where together we build your empire and transform your subconscious stories about what's possible for your business, body, and life. I'm your host, Kimberly Spencer, founder of CrownYourself.com, and I'm a master mindset coach, best-selling author, TEDx speaker, known to my clients as a game changer. Each week, you get the conscious leadership strategies you need to help you reign with courage, clarity, and confidence so that you too can make the income and impact you deserve. Imagine this podcast as your royal invitation to step into your full potential and reign in your divine purpose. Your sovereignty starts here, and your reign is now.
Rebecca, I don't know how many lifetimes you've lived in one life.
I feel like it's been at least 6 or 7.
I mean, just reading your book, Lost Girl, it's amazing how far you've been able to come. Like, you literally went from the hood to the White House. You went from cockroaches crawling on you to now running a multi-million-dollar company, multiple companies. I think the place that I want to start, because there's so many places, is really in faith. And throughout the book, you have a through line of faith and an understanding and a relationship with God, sometimes not always like the best one, but I think that happens with anybody who's gone through any form of abuse. Seeing people who did things like Grandpa Willie, who did things, I mean, he raped your grandmother, she had a child, and who was your mom, and then he changed, or he went off and was involved with the Pentecostal church. And so how did you come through to a relationship with God that I know you're very faith-based now? And what was that journey like, seeing people who were speaking one thing, but who had done such horrible things in their past?
Yeah. First of all, Kimberly, thank you for having me. I just love your heart. I love your passion for transformation, and especially for propelling people, encouraging people to live their best life in terms of their embracing their own change and their own destiny. And it's really my jam. So I appreciate you having me on your podcast. Listen, there is all sorts of abuse that has gone on in the world, and here in America, there's a lot of need, a lot of lack, a lot of want. I had a significant amount of what I refer to as spiritual abuse. Certainly the physical abuse was there, the emotional abuse was there, the mental abuse was there, mind abuse. But, the spiritual abuse is one that goes really deep, because when you grow up with such dysfunctional religious people, I always tell people there's religion and then there's relationship. So I grew up in religion to God, and it was a very dogmatic religion that was stifling, that was detrimental. I spent probably 2 chapters in the first chapters of my book talking about growing up in that intense abuse. My grandfather, bless his heart, he was bigger than life. He was literally 6'5", 6'6", almost 400 pounds. His clothes had to be special made. Where my mom, it was half Spaniard and half Mexican. So the Spanish side of his genes were he was monumental big. I mean, he's huge. So he was a huge man. So when he abused, it was scary because he was a big man, right? But he also only knew what he knew. And I forgave. I remember going to my grandfather's funeral. I was the only one in my entire family that went to his funeral. My siblings wouldn't go. My mother would not go. But I remember going to his funeral and looking at his frail body in that casket, Kimberly. And the reason I went is I had a dream of him about a week before that. And I knew he was dying. He was in his 80s. He died of cancer. Did not believe in doctors. He believed God was going to heal him. So he was one of those ignorant people that didn't understand that God sometimes heals through medicine, right? So he died and he was decimated with cancer. And so I looked in his coffin and I saw a shrunken, frail man riddled with a cancer body. He was no longer a beast, a big man. And I remember God feeling the impression at that moment of saying, no one is beyond frailty, and no one is perfect. And I always tell people that have experienced negative things with God, through other people that abuse them or that teach them in the wrong way. You gotta take in, spit out the bones and take in the meat. I learned over my adult life now to spit out the bones of what I learned through my grandfather and my mother, because he abused her as well. And take in the meat. And my grandfather he was bigger than life. He was a Mexican evangelist, and he helped a lot of people that were predominantly poor through Juarez, through Guatemala, through different parts of Mexico that he traveled to, and he was known as a kind of a healing evangelist of his day. But he was a very sick person, and so I had to probably in my, I would say, early to late 20s when I truly experienced the God of love, the God of forgiveness, the God of grace, not the God of hell, fire, and brimstone that was gonna, strike me down every time I sinned. But I came into my relationship with God on my own through a lot of really good people in the church that I started attending, including my husband, my then teacher, who became a husband. He was a youth teacher in the youth ministry that I was part of, and just an incredible teacher of the Word of God. And I came into my relationship to God on my own. Everybody has to find God for themselves. You cannot live in your relationship with the divine connection, the God, the deity, wherever, whatever you aspire to, you have to find it for yourself. And you have to understand his heart for you, for yourself. Nobody can teach you that. You have to find that. And I found him. And it was quite revolutionary. I depict that transition in Lost Girl.
I think one of the things, like from your husband to all the mentors that you found along the way, if there was a person in your circumstances when you were younger, poverty, abuse, maybe even pregnant, and they needed support, what mentors would you encourage them to seek out?
Well, for me, it was pastoral care. It was people in that little youth church in East Austin. And there was a couple in particular, Dave and Lupita. They were the youth pastors of the little bitty, inner city church. And so I had a mentor in my workplace when I worked for Ann Richards and Kay Belly Hutchison Donna, and I talk about her. And then my spiritual mentor, Lupita. Lupita was the kindest, most loving person, and she oozed the love of God. And I remember just thinking, wow, that's amazing. And, I came under their leadership. They took me through a very intensive 12-week Bible study of learning who God really was. And, they were available to me. They paired me with women that had my journey and that I could talk to and meet with when I struggled. And believe it or not, my mom, I moved back in with my mom. My mom came full circle. She was the culprit of my abuse in the beginning. And then when she gave her heart to God and she began her journey, she came around and she became very instrumental to me. My mom helped me a lot, and she helped me a lot with forgiveness. And, so, everything was redeemed. I always say, when you go through life, things can be redemptive, right? You actually talk about this in one of your episodes, how it's important to embrace the mess sometimes, because sometimes it could be your propeller, and I firmly have lived that my entire life. So I think people that are facing that should look at it the perspective of seeking out those community, whether it's in a church or whether it's in a small group, a small women's group. You can connect with women that are walking life similar to you, and just be available and make yourself available to have others speak into your life. And take in the meat and spit out the bones. If you're looking for that perfect person who's going to be your mentor forever and give you everything perfectly, that probably is not going to exist. I had a variety of people, all which brought value to my life, and especially the spiritual component.
I love the point that you touch on of finding that perfect person. It's what I call like the pedestal problem, because anytime you put someone up on a pedestal, it's a very shaky surface and they can easily fall off, and we're all human. And we all make mistakes. And so at some point, somebody is probably going to let you down in some way, whether it's a boundary or an expectation. So I love that you share, like, to find the people and to find the meat of what it is that they can offer your life, and then to spit the bones out.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
phenomenal metaphor.
I
There's no
recently
need to eat those bones.
Yes, no, and if you like to eat them, then but nobody likes to eat bones. I recently, a couple of years ago, was mentoring a single mom who had a lot of challenges in her personal life, and she dealt with a lot of mental trauma, and as a result, needed a lot of mental psychiatric help. And I worked with her for about a year, and spent twice a month, an hour, 2 hours a month with her. And after a year, I said to her, I feel like I've done all I can. I provided you the tools. I've shared my story with you. It's really up to you. But she was never really taking hold of the reins of dealing with her mental trauma. And I told her, I said, you need psychiatric care. Like, you need to talk to a counselor about what has happened to you, because you've been through a lot. I am certainly a bouncing board to pray with you and to give you counsel about how, I lived my life and how I forgave my abusers, but you need psychiatric care. I got psychiatric care. I still see a counselor today every couple of months. And she never did. So I had to cut that cord, because I felt like, I'm only enabling her lack of getting that self-initiative. But it's so important to get care. There are so many ways. And now with the internet, Kimberly, there's so many great podcasts. Dr. Caroline Leaf, who you and I both talked about, I listen to her podcasts regularly. She has a phenomenal wealth of resources available to you to learn and to implement through her Think, Learn, Succeed podcast. She has one that I love called How to Deal with Your Mental Mess. I love that podcast, and it's like 300 episodes. So there's so much data and content available to us for learning and for coaching now that you and I 20 years ago didn't have access to.
Yeah. It just takes the initiative, and it also takes ownership and acceptance of where you're at. And I think that that's a hard one to teach in a society and a culture that promotes victimhood and sometimes rewards it in a way. And so how do you cultivate? Because I mean, you're running multiple companies, very successful. You've been at the rank of what a two-star general is, leading people at the White House. How do you cultivate or seek out, or is it something you have to seek out, is people who take ownership? Because there's a through line with your message is the responsibility of legacy. And I think responsibility, it starts with being responsible to yourself and taking ownership of where you are and who you are. And you've done that with your past and with where you're going in your future.
Yeah. And, Kimberly, it all starts at home. I encourage women, especially moms, and wives, you have to start at home, and you have to make sure that you are being transparent and accountable and reliable and available. My kids, they think their mom hung the moon. I'm the matriarch of the family. And, people oftentimes ask me, how did you work for almost, 15 years with President Bush, and then you're in the White House, then you go to West Point, and you're traveling all over the world sharing your story, and you're launching a book, and you're running a multi-million-dollar business, and you have your nonprofit, and you're a mom and you're a wife. How do you do it all? Are you losing something? But it all starts in my home. My home was always and has always been my priority. I tell the story in the book, in my probably month 2 of being in the White House, where I walked into the Oval Office and I almost resigned to the president because my 8th grader was just really, really rebelling and having a lot of challenges. She did not want to be in DC. She wanted to know why she had to move from Texas. I don't want to move. You work for the president. I don't. Why do I have to be here? I had to leave my friends. And she was just rebelling. And I shared with the president when he asked me, how's your daughter doing? And I said, she's not doing really well. I may need to step down. This may not be working, because I was working 14 hours a day in those early months. My husband was an incredible anchor during that time at home, and he hadn't gotten his job quite yet. He started working for President Bush in month 4 of our transition. So he had a few months to be home and settle the kids with that move from Texas to DC. And President's first thing he said is, bring her to me. And so I found an opportunity. I have a picture of this in my office where President was coming back from Camp David, and, Marine One was landing on the lawn, and I had my kids and my husband there with me at the line. Normally staff can greet him when he's coming in, and he darted right to my daughter. I have a picture of this where he pulled her in and he said, Crystal, how are you? Of course, he knew her from me working for him as governor. And he pulled her in and said, do you know how important it is what your mom does for me? Your mom is so important to my team. thank you for allowing your mom to do what she does for me. And her eyes are like, I cannot believe the president's thanking me. Now, she was in 8th grade, okay? So take it for a grain of salt, but I'm sorry. Anybody that has that experience is going to get their shit together. So, we began to see little transitions and little, along with getting her plugged into her local church. We sent her on a missions trip that summer to get a little bit of, service in her belt, under her belt. But those things were so important. But I almost resigned. And, my kids are so important to me, my husband, our family unit. And listen, you can gain the world and lose your family, and it's not worth it. So I always tell women, especially moms, make sure that there's a balance for that focus on the home. Let it start with the accountability and the ownership at home.
Yeah, and being really present, like in the time that you are. How did you bring presence when you're working such long hours into the home when you were with your daughter?
Well, our kids, I have a 30-year-old son and a 36-year-old daughter. Our son was in 1st grade at the time. My daughter was in 8th grade, and, very little, very young. He was very young. And my husband and I were a team, and we tag teamed. And, you have to have a strong partner. And listen, ladies, don't marry someone who wants to just throw their feet up and do nothing in the house and expect you to do everything. You have to have that partner. And we divide and conquered. I literally, Kimberly, would get home from the White House. We would get home from our work in DC probably about 6:30 in the evening. We'd leave, around 5. It was an hour and a half commute each way. Get home, I would have a suit on. I'd have my apron. I'd throw my apron over my suit, kick my shoes off. I had all the meal prep done. So I'm a big meal prep person. I have been my whole career. I've been a working mom. I meal prep even today. So the weekend, Sundays is about meal prepping and, chopping stuff up and having things ready to go and, literally put dinner on in 20 minutes. And every night while I was in DC working those long hours, serving the president, and really every night of our entire family, we sat down at the table. There was no TVs on. We would have a sit down dinner, every single night, Monday through Friday. Weekends were for fun and having pizza and going out. But Monday through Friday, those kids had me and daddy, and he would help with homework. I would start dinner. Then, we would divide and conquer on the bedtime. It was a team effort. And I think that's what's missing, I think, in our culture is this is a fatherless society, as you know, and there's a lot of challenges with fatherless, going on. And single moms, listen, single moms are our heroes. They're the biggest,
Seriously.
most amazing people on the planet. And I know single moms who do exactly what I did without a partner at home, but they make their children their priority and they're still very successful. So it's possible. It's a little harder when you don't have a partner, but, leverage and that's why being part of a healthy church body is so important. In those early years, our church community was life-giving to us. They helped us in many, many ways.
I find it so interesting, your journey, because you never had what would be considered a healthy home modeled for you. So was it just intention and being very intentional with how you were setting up your home with your husband? Because I know you've described your husband as your biggest cheerleader, and having my biggest cheerleader and being married to my biggest cheerleader is like a game changer, considering having relationships with that was not the case. But because you didn't have that model, what boundaries did you put in place initially? Or how did your relationship evolve so that you were able to cultivate this really healthy, present home life?
Yeah. Well, David and I both grew up with single mothers. My mother abandoned me when I was 5, as you know, and Lost Girl, I tell the full story. She was a drug addict. David's mother, they lost their dad when he was 5, and she went into a real deep mental depression for about a year. So she was a single mom, the hardest working single mom. She worked 3 jobs so she wouldn't have to get on welfare. On the opposite of my mom living on welfare. So we come from single parents who have very different moms. So when we got married, we knew we wanted to do something different. So here's the thing about trauma and tragedy. You can either use it to learn from it and it propel you to success and do it totally different, or you can be in the dysfunctional cycle of dysfunction and generational tragedy, which happens a lot, especially with our inner city families. There's a lot of dysfunction and cycle going on. So David and I determined we were going to do it different. And we sought out help. We read books. We were big readers of books. We took classes. One of my mentors very early on in my career, Donna Reynolds, who I talk about in the book, was a mom of 8 kids, had been married at that point almost 10 years. She ended up losing her husband when they were married after 40 years. But she was an incredible model. I asked her lots of questions. I was always asking Donna questions. Whenever I went through things in the home, I would come to the office. She was my boss at the time in Governor Bush's office, and I would ask her questions. I'm an insatiable learner. I am like not afraid to ask questions and learn from people that do it better than I do. I still do that today. I'm not the smartest knife in the block, in the drawer, but I ask a lot of questions, and I get a lot of smart people around me that are feeding into my content and my brain and learning. So we determined we were going to do life different in our family. Now, listen, we had a lot of problems. We were both very dysfunctional when we got married. So David had an anger problem. I had an emotional dysfunction problem. And I talk about that in the book and how we healed through that together. But we always made our kids our priority and got lots of help to learn what we didn't know. You can always learn. The brain is so powerful to expand and learning and then doing things different. You just have to have the drive and the plan to do it.
And it also is a testament to changing your environment. Because I remember when I was 19 and I moved out of my family's home and I changed, growing up with addiction for 30 years and shifting, and I was teaching 10 hours a day, teaching Pilates, and some of my clients became my greatest mentors, where I was suddenly learning and seeing how to do life differently. And it's that shift of environment. And you changed environments a few times, like coming from that border town and to then moving into Austin. So when you think of the environment and how the environment concurrently shaped you, what were the biggest ones that were the biggest leaps for you?
Yeah. So your environment will make or break you. I am a product of my network. I am a product of the people that have influenced me. I was a product of my environment when I was a drug addict and got pregnant out of high school. And I'm a product of my environment as a successful entrepreneur, executive now, and thought leader. So I am a product of my environment. There are really 3 things that you have to do in order to really re-engineer your environment. First of all, it doesn't happen through osmosis. It's not going to happen because you wish it. I'm all about positive thinking and speaking things in the air, but all of that can be hogwash to someone who doesn't take action.
Okay.
And my case in point, my mother was the biggest orator of God's word and knew the Bible valedictorian in her Bible school class. Amazing. She knew all the positive affirmations there were. She lived in abject poverty on welfare her whole life, and she died of cancer because she refused to fight. So all that speaking and affirmation didn't do her any good because she didn't take action to change her environment and move the needle. So, you have to be able to change, put a plan in place to change it. I personally had to completely eliminate relationships that were toxic. I just went through last year another cycle of relationship elimination. I call it evaluate your relationships every year, and they have to either provide value, breathe life, or encouragement. They have to be able to encourage you. If you have toxic relationships that are bringing you down, that are draining you, and sometimes family, right? Family could be the worst. Joel Osteen, favorite pastor, America's pastor, says some family you just got to love from a distance. If you're finding toxicity and negativity and just, not a healthy environment for anybody in your life, you really have to eliminate that and make good decisions to surround yourself with the right environment. The second thing is I had to be willing to take action and fail. Your environmental things, sometimes things happen in life that just cause failure. It's not because you went out to fail or you tried to do it wrong. It just happens. People are flawed. And, you have to be willing to fail, and you have to be willing to learn from those failures. Those are super important to changing your situation and re-engineering your brain and your environment for success. And the third thing is just getting that relentless, you call it grit in one of your podcasts. I call it grit resolve. It's that resolve and that grit that says, you know what, I'm not going to give up. I know what I want to do in life. I know I'm talented. And even if you don't think you are talented, you fake it till you make it. It's like, even if you don't have confidence in yourself, you find a way to get that confidence, but it's that resolve and grit that it never relents and never gives up. Those are the three, I think, most important for me.
I love the breakdown of the toxicity, because I think sometimes we can misconstrue a relationship that's toxic for a relationship that's triggering us to grow, especially if
Mhm.
we are challenging us to rise, and or that's allowing us to see something within ourselves that that may be our shadow, that may be something we don't want to see necessarily.
Mhm.
How do you determine the difference between a relationship that's triggering or challenging you to evolve beyond, and a relationship that's toxic?
Well, I have a perfect example of that. My husband, my husband and I, when we first got married, were completely different personalities. Now I'm a lot more like him, and we butt heads because we're both badasses in that perspective. But my husband was laser focused, visionary, a little less empathetic than I'd like him to be about my situation. And, he challenged me to step up and deal with my mess. He also challenged me to think different and to get outside of that poverty mentality. And I tell several stories in the book of where he did that. But at first, I thought he was cruel. I thought he was being mean. I thought he was not being empathetic and woe is me. And he just was relentless, and he would not tolerate or entertain emotional. If I was an emotional basket case, which I did, I would crumble every time there was conflict. He'd say, "Get up, let's deal with this. Quit crying. I'm not going to talk to you while you're crying." And I thought, well, he's being an asshole. But you know what? David's strength, and now he's like, can I go back a little bit and can you be a little less strong? He'll tell me, can I have my Rebecca back a little bit? Because I'm probably a little stronger than, I'm very strong now, but I'm a little more relentless in terms of my focus. And I don't tend to be and show as much emotion as I used to. And I've had this protection of a wall exterior. And so sometimes he's like, I really do want you to be a little more emotional. So you got to balance it out, right? But David was a big catalyst in that strength. And also my environment and working for political officials. Listen, when you work for Ann Richards, K. Billy Hutchison, and George W. Bush, three Texas icons, and the people they surround themselves with are tough as nails. They're taking crap left and right from the media. You're watching that and you see that resilience built up. You have to be strong in your core. And so I've built my core and my ability to leverage the things that I saw 20 years ago or 30 years ago. That's a really toxic behavior. It really wasn't. It was really to strengthen me and to make me deal, but also to make me stand on my own
Mm.
2 feet. I remember one argument in particular. We were probably married, year or two, where I would sit on the couch with my head and just cry in my hand. And he's like, stand up and stop crying. Like, stand up. Like, he wanted me to stand up to him. And those were really pivotal moments for me, Kimberly, of strength that I had to display.
Mm. I identify so deeply with that emotional roller coaster in a way of, you know, when my husband and I first got together, he said for at least the first couple of years, he said there was always drama. It was always, oh, your dad did
Yeah.
this, and then there was this, and because there was always some drama that was going on. And he always said, he's like, I was just waiting. Okay, what's the next thing that she's going to show up into my house at? So, but
Mhm.
fortunately, like, he was this guiding and grounding force, and I know David has been such a grounding force for you and creating what you've been able to create in the partnership. And that's just invaluable, is having that person to ground and to also challenge and champion you into rising into your highest and best.
Yeah, and he helped me put boundaries in place with my family because he
Mm.
saw the dysfunction in my family, and he's like, "I'm sorry, but I'm not gonna let them take advantage of you." And he put that boundary in place with my mother, with my twin brother, with my, other siblings. And, sometimes with family, they don't understand that when somebody comes in and puts boundaries in place. But my husband has done it out of a heart of protecting me, but also helping us as a family be healthy. He would say, I'm sorry, but we're not bringing that into this house because we have children now. And that's not going to be healthy. A good example of that. My mother was notorious for just popping in whenever she wanted to. 10 p.m. at night, she'd pop in after her revivals to come and hang out or eat. And he's like, no, Grace, you're not going to do that. You're going to call. Can't just pop in. Rebecca's not going to be available at your disposal anymore. And, my family early on saw that as, well, he's being controlling. But for me, it was a healthy boundary.
Mm. Yeah, I so identify with that. I remember the letter my husband wrote to my father and saying, you will never speak to my wife like that ever again.
We've had those letters go too to my siblings, and they're tough letters, and it's caused a break in the relationship at times. But God is the master of healer, and He heals things in all. But it sounds like your husband and my husband would get along.
I think we would get along pretty well.
We have to find time to make that happen.
Do a double date sometime.
Yeah.
I love how in your book you really highlight how your environment growing up and all of the poverty and all of the abuse, it created internally a self-talk of self-blame. And I know from those who have been abused and having done a lot of research and healing on my own abuse from childhood, it's nowhere near compared to what you went through, but oh my gosh. But that there's something called a just world bias. And it's basically our bias where it's our inner child. It's like trying to see the world as fair. And when something isn't fair, when it's just wrong, what happened to you, it can create in us a belief that, oh, it's our fault because, oh, I must deserve this because
the shame. Yeah.
The shame, the belief of being fundamentally flawed. Does self-blame, or what role does self-blame still play, if at all, in your life today?
Well, I can tell you one example of self-blame was I unfortunately became promiscuous very young. I was raped at 13 by a man in his 20s. And I didn't know it was rape at the time. I thought he was being nice, and but call it what it is. But it created for me, like growing up without a father. I didn't know my father. As you know, the book talks about the dysfunction around that whole birth process. But I always thought it was my fault. And so, I ended up getting involved from the age of 13 up until I married really my husband and stopped the nonsense. My men in their 20s and older men who would take advantage of me. And, I was a really pretty girl. I was always the life of the party. And in my community, which was Hispanic, I was the lightest person there. I'm mixed, as you know, half Hispanic, half white. So I never looked like anybody in the room. I always stood out. And I loved that because it gave me attention. Well, I always believed when I came into my relationship with my husband, who was a true, true lover of God and loved me and wanted to treat me like the true queen that I was, I had a hard time with that because I thought he wanted something from me. And my whole life I had been abused by men. And so, I saw myself as I've done it, I've deserved it. I went to that party, I had that drink, I took that drug. I let them. And so I had to deal with that with my counselor over the years, early years, and let that shame go, because guess what? I didn't deserve any of that. I did not deserve to be sexually molested at age 5. I did not deserve to be sexually molested at age 13. I did not deserve to be impregnated by a baby daddy drug dealer at 17. And so I had to deal with, yes, I made poor choices, but it was the environment and the lack of knowledge. There's a scripture in the Bible that says, the lack of knowledge, my people perish. It's so true. When you have knowledge, you die. When you lack knowledge, you die. And I was dead to myself. And so I had to find a way to deal with all that shame. And I talk about how I did that in the book, but it's so important to not blame ourselves. Women are the worst. You will see
so hard on ourselves.
You never see a man blaming themselves for anything. They always try to blame you, right? It's always a shift. No, I behave this way because of your fault. But women are the worst of blaming themselves and blaming, I deserve it, or I put myself in that situation, or woe is me. And I think we have to get outside of that and know that sometimes shit just happens, life happens, tragedy happens, and we cannot blame ourselves. We just have to move forward and forgive ourselves. I had to forgive myself and release before I could forgive and release others.
What does forgiveness feel like to you?
Forgiveness is honestly the most incredible catalyst to my change. I have a whole chapter dedicated on how I went through the forgiveness process. And here's the incredible thing about forgiveness. It doesn't have to mean the other person owns anything, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
I forgave myself, and it's a very empowering thing, and it's very liberating, but it also gives you the ability to deal with the darkness in you that you feel is there and just release it to God. I'm a firm believer that God's grace, the divinity's grace covers a multitude of things that happen, and there's no limit to that, right? There's no cap. Oh, geez, forgiveness, you're capped out. You've already had too much of it. It's just the redemptive way that God works. And so it's such an empowering thing. And it is probably the biggest catalyst to my transformation is forgiveness.
Which one was greater, your forgiveness of self or your forgiveness of others? Which one do you feel was a greater catalyst?
The biggest person that I had to really forgive and release was my mom. I was the only one in our entire family that really honored her to her death through her battle with cancer. And it was really difficult for my siblings to do that and for my family to accept her because she was very dysfunctional and she was very hurtful. But I loved her where she was. I remember I had an epiphany in my 30s, and it accelerated when she got diagnosed with cancer, and I had to move back from DC and resign to the administration to be close to her because I knew she was gonna accelerate the process of her transition with the cancer. She didn't want to get treatment the way she needed it. But I had to forgive her and I had to love her where she was. But here's the powerful thing, Kimberly. When I forgave my mom, the first time I went through a process of forgiveness with her over 10 years, the very first time I verbalized it to her, she was a preacher. She was an amazing orator of God's word. She had just finished preaching and I came over to her and I said, Mom, I want you to know I forgive you for all of the abuse. She looked at me and she said, Mija, forgive me for what? And I said, for all the abuse in my life. She's like, I didn't abuse you guys. All of that stuff Jesus forgave me for already. Why don't you just let it go? None of that is relevant anymore. Just move on. And she never wanted to talk about what happened. And she never wanted to take ownership. Because in her mind, God had forgiven her, therefore let it go. Well, guess what, Kimberly? That's not real life. We're not
True.
in heaven. We're here on earth. 80 plus years. And we have to verbalize if we hurt someone. We have to say, hey, I'm sorry I hurt you. I know that was really hurtful. Please forgive me. And my mom went to her deathbed not thinking that there was any forgiveness to be had because she had been forgiven. But that's okay. I let her go. I released it. And I said, I love you, Mom. And I loved her. I served her. I took care of her financially when she got really sick and couldn't do anything for herself. And I remember that death experience with her for me was liberating because I knew I had done everything that I needed to do while she was on this earth. And now she's in heaven and I'm thrilled that she's healed both in her mind and her body. My mom was she was an amazing person. She was just a sick person, but she was an amazing person.
How did you process the grief that also simultaneously came with the freedom of no longer having that influence in your life? Was that challenging for you to hold the dichotomy?
No, because I knew my mom was going to live a short life. I knew, and I saw the writing on the wall. And I knew I had her for about 5 to 7 years. And so I worked through that over that. A lot of people don't have that time. They don't have it. Parents are abruptly taken or a loved one's taken in a tragic or accident. And, they don't have that time. I always tell people, don't wait. I'm dealing with this situation right now with a loved one that I've been, really hopeful that the forgiveness will happen. And he's just not open to it. And, I am like, I don't want to wait. Tomorrow's promised to no one. You literally, loved ones could be taken overnight. Like when you know that you have an issue with forgiveness and you have an off with somebody, it's important to take action and not wait. We wait too long. Human nature likes to hold on to grudges and hold on to, well, until you acknowledge that you hurt me and some of that, you will never get to the bottom of it. Sometimes you just have to let go and forgive and love unconditionally. And after all, that's how God loves us, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm. I would love to know the transition from being in the White House to growing a multi-million-dollar company. Something, again, you pioneered the way. You never had that modeled for you. And yet, I had this suspicion because I told this to one of my clients. She was struggling with her child getting into dealing drugs and whatnot. And I said, he sounds very entrepreneurial. She was taken back. And it would actually, I took that from one of my mentors, Tom Bilyeu, who, when he was building Quest Nutrition, like, he was hiring people who were in like the ghetto. And that experience, he said, a drug dealer, they know the competition. They know where
Yeah.
so they
know how to make sales.
They know how to make sales. Like, that's what I did. Like, I said, sounds like your son is really good in sales. And she's like, I never would have thought that. I'd prefer he sold something differently. I said,
Yeah.
Exactly. But it was a reframe that actually she needed at the time to see. So this actually, it doesn't mean that he's a failure. It means that there's actually like, there's a skill set there. It's just being used in a negative way. So
Yeah.
if you were to know, like, what are those positives from growing up that were those lessons that you took from being in the drug scene and dating one of the biggest drug dealers in Austin that may have served in your entrepreneurial sales career?
Yeah. So honestly, I wasn't ever close to that. Thankfully my baby daddy, who's dead now, he got killed by his probation officer, but I call him our sperm donor because that's about all he did. I was never in his network, and I'm thankful for that, because when the FBI busted him, there wasn't a trace of my involvement. He kept me at bay at that. My entrepreneur skill sets came from working in government and working, believe it or not, under the bushes. As you know, there are business people. My top mentor, Clay Johnson, who's President Bush's best friend from high school at Yale, he was an entrepreneur. But the Bushes surrounded themselves with business people who happened to also understand government. And they were not bureaucrats that lived in government their whole life. They had really smart, I could name smart business people that had started and sold companies or acquired companies and built companies. And so I was around that entrepreneurial spirit in government with people that worked for Governor Bush and President Bush. So watching them and just the skill sets, it's the negotiation, it's everything that I did for the president. I was in the people business, right? So it was negotiating skills. It was making effective change to initiatives. It was implementing policy. It was building an initiative from the ground up. It was launching an initiative. It was, negotiating with government leaders about President Bush's policy, because there were, as you know, the president gets elected and there's a whole career of bureaucrat that exists. You've got to, as a political official, you have to be able to influence those people to help you. Otherwise, they'll squat you and not ever get anything done. But there's a lot of good people in government. So working with those people and bringing them along. And so all those skills, I never really thought of starting a business. And I tell the full story later on in the book, which your readers can read. But it happened when I started, I left government and I went into a private sector firm for the first time in my private sector career to help them start a government practice, because they were interested in working with the government. And I built it from the ground up. And within 6 years, I grew it to 7 million. So all of a sudden, I'm like, wait a minute. I've done that for this owner and I have no ownership. And I was sitting down with my mentor and telling him about all the success, my practice, and how it was, the highest paid employee and executive vice president, and how the owner was super happy with all the things that I was doing. And he looked at me and he said, what you're doing for him, you could do for yourself. And Kimberly, I had never thought of that. This is why the power of influence and people you're with matters. If he had not said that to me, and subsequently enough, my practice had gotten so much success that one of the owners was threatened and was kind of trying to come in my domain and take over, not having any background in government. But he wanted to take over my practice. It was his company. He could do whatever he wanted to do, but he started inserting himself into my business, and it ruffled a few feathers, because very, very few people that don't know me know I have to be in charge. Like, I'm good, so get out of my way and leave me alone, because don't get in my stuff unless you're going to bring something of value. Why are you going to come in and change the way something that's working for you? Well, they tried to do that. They rearranged the company and put me as more of a SME. And I saw it as a way that it was time to get out. And so I negotiated my way out, talked myself out of my non-compete, which my negotiating skills are quite good, and started my business. And I would never in a million years imagine that we would be 130 people strong across 9 states, multi-million dollars, and growing. And but I believed in myself. I believed in the people that believed in me and what they were saying was possible about me. And I just took the leap and of faith and decided, what the heck? I can always go back and work for somebody if this doesn't work, but I'm going to try it. And it's worked.
I love what you said of you believed what other people believed in you. And something one of my clients, Lauren Wittig, had said on a podcast. She said, one of the most powerful things I said when we were in our coaching is I said, just borrow my belief in you. And she went off and just skyrocketed her business. But it was like the power of belief in someone else. And I know you're nurturing that with your Girls of Legacy. And
I am
showing and providing a container of belief for these women to be able to grow and evolve. And
it's so important. And you as a coach, you know that better than anybody because this is what you do for a living. And sometimes it just takes that one person believing in you to make you believe in yourself. I didn't have just one person. I have about 5 to 7 people in my journey that I can pinpoint believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. But why did I have them in my life? It's because I put myself in a position to be influenced by them and to see me in action. I was in May, this past May, I was at the Bush Library with the Bushes and had a chance to see the president. He's read my book, Lost Girl, and wrote me a personal note about it, was incredibly touched by it. But one of his top advisors, who's very, very nationally known, I won't name her name, but she's just a bigger than life, expert. And everybody, that follows the Bushes knows this woman. She was hugely influential. I knew her and she knew me, and we talked, ever so often, but it wasn't like we were in a relationship together. I saw her and I thought, oh, there she is. I'm going to go say hello to her. And I walked up to her. The first thing she said is, oh, there's our Rebecca. She said, we are so proud of you. You are our shining star out of the Bush legacy. And she threw me back because I hadn't seen her in 10 years. And then I started talking to her. She's like, oh, I understand you wrote a book. Oh, we all have it. So somebody in the Bush circle circulated my book and she's like, we are so proud of you. We always believed in you. But Kimberly, when she said that to me, this is a bigger than life powerhouse woman. I never knew that she was watching. I never knew that she was perceptive enough to watch me, but she was. And so when you are in your workplace, when you are in your sphere of influence, you don't know who's watching you. So how are you going to show up to that, right? And sometimes when we let things ruffle us and let, environmental factors in the office, get us off our whack, and we need to remember people are watching us. And it doesn't mean we have to be perfect. I hate that word. It doesn't exist. But we should always know that there's opportunities to be influenced by people and to have people influence us in order to help yield our success.
And sometimes they're not the ones engaging necessarily.
Exactly.
There we go. So there's a through line of influence that you've been using a lot. And I want to know, what does influence mean for you?
It's interesting because when I think of influence, I think of impact to people. I don't care how much power people think they have or how much influence. If it doesn't serve humankind and it's not helping people be better, helping communities be better, helping develop people and using that influence for good. I mean, Kimberly, look at the situation we're in right now in our country, in the political arena, and how divisive, how toxic, how incredibly just disturbing things are. People are using their power for self-gain. It's like influence, when we are blessed with influence, and it is a blessing to have influence. God does bless it. Now we're working hard too to advance ourselves. It doesn't happen through osmosis. But when you get influence, when you get power, when you get that positional influence, it's meant to be used for good. What would America be like if every person, every CEO, every community leader, every politician, every person in the community, no matter what level they're at, use their influence to serve humankind and for good? What would we be like as a country?
Service instead of self-gain.
So influence for me is about service and about impact.
Where are you looking to influence next?
Well, we shall see what the future holds. Right now, I'm focused on growing AvantGarde. We are growing at a rapid pace. Last year, we grew about 10%. This year, we're trying to get double-digit growths. The year before, we grew at 22%. So every year, we're like accelerating growing. And we can grow and I can get in a place where, this is a well-oiled machine. We'll see what the future holds. I worked for 3 political icons, Ann Richards, K. Billy Hutchison, and George W. Bush. And you can't work for 3 amazing Texas icons and not get the Texas bug for public service. But I'm very intently thinking, what does that look like for me? Is there a reason for that? Like, what do I need to think of in terms of my next reinvention? Because I've had, as I said, 7. Do I have an 8 coming along? Perhaps
9 lives, like a cat, bouncing back.
We shall see. 2024, I think, is going to be a really strategic year for really honing in on what does that next step look like. But right now, it's about growing AvantGarde and investing in Girls of Legacy and my nonprofit and my initiative to empower and enable inner city girls for development and scholarship. And so we're all about Girls of Legacy. And so those 2 things, along with the book and the public speaking, keep me plenty busy. Oh, and being a grandmother and mom.
That too. That's a huge role, especially grandma. Grandmas are so important.
Yes, I have amazing grandbabies who love their nana, so try to spend time with them.
If you could wave a magic wand and change one thing about how our country is currently run, what would it be?
So my magic wand today is to deal with the Texas border issue. It is a tragic situation, and it's a humanitarian crisis at incredible proportions. I'm very concerned for the women and children that are here, what's happening to them, the lack of care. I'm very concerned with the lack of security on our border and who's coming in and not knowing that. I think the number I heard yesterday was this upwards of 10 million. I think America is going to have a mess on their hands. And it's the biggest issue for me right now because I'm in Texas, because I'm from El Paso, a border town where they're being decimated with this crisis, humanitarian crisis. And, that's that magic wand for me is probably not going to happen anytime soon. But, I think we have to look at changing the direction of this country and the political tone. I worked for 3 political officials, all of which were very collaborative in their styles. And actually, back in the day, Kimberly, when Democrats were talking to Republicans and Republicans were talking to Democrats, there is no, if I could wave a magic wand, it would be to get them all to work together and just get stuff done for the American people and quit fighting. And it's just very discouraging. And it's the worst I've ever seen in my career and having been involved for a very long time. So I'm hopeful that will change. But I don't have a magic wand, so I'm not holding my breath. But that's a great question. Thank you for asking.
So we do the best we can with the resources that we have available. And how are you bridging the divide? Because I think the divisiveness, it goes beyond just political parties. I think there's divisiveness within the home, within social media, within the fact that any keyboard warrior can spout whatever they want through the protection of a screen. And it creates, like, for me, my awareness is really in AI and in technology, as far as like how are we training AI as a collective human race to learn from who we are, because it's going to become really smart and sentient at one point, and not in the not too far future. And do we want it seeing our divisive humanity and being like, you know what, we all need to be controlled?
That's right. Yeah, I attended part of a women's group, CEO, top earning CEOs here in Austin, and we about 15 of us attended an AI session last week where an AI expert came to talk to us about the evolution of AI and what's happening. And it's fascinating to me, the charts and the graphs of how fast it's taking off from other what we call IT platform innovations.
Mm-hmm.
It's like they took 10 years. AI is like on an 18-month cycle. It's crazy. Um, I can tell you what I do in my brand
Mm-hmm.
and in my social
Yeah.
media. If I take it through a lens of, is it going to provide encouragement, knowledge? Knowledge is in facts. Don't put any fake facts out there, because there's a lot of fake facts going on. But knowledge, insight, encouragement, or anything that's going to add value to people. And I've been really disciplined about trying not to put negative stuff out there that is going to be toxic or opinionated in a point where it's going to divide people. And when I do put an opinion out there, such as the Texas border, because it's a very divisive opinion, but I'll put it out there. I'll say, here's what's going on. What do you think? What position do you take? And no haters on my feed, please. I'll delete you. So I let people know, if you're going to provide an opinion, don't hate on other people.
Mm-hmm.
My friend, tonight, I'm going to a book signing for my friend Denise Getchum, who, by the way, you have to meet, and I'll make that introduction happen. She wrote a book called Politics for People Who Hate Politics. And in the book, her entire premise is, how do you have conversations with people who have differing opinions than you do? And in some cases, polar opposite. And how do you walk away from the dinner table without hating each other? And she's not just talking about politics, she's talking about conversations on race, conversations on issues that you may not agree on. There's got to be a way we can, as a human race, have dialogue without killing each other or discrediting each other. Or more importantly, in her book, she talks about entire families are split up over divisive issues.
Yeah.
And I've certainly seen that in my family. And so it's so important. I'm really proud that she's putting that message out there, and I would encourage people to look it up. It's really, I listened to it, and it was convicting for me. And I'm a pretty positive person, but it made me think different about how I need to be having conversations with those of opposite opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. I had Brent Hamachek, who's the co-founder of Common Ground Campus, that is all about, his podcast was all about how to bridge that divide, and how these events that he's staging at college campuses at least provide some sort of awareness and perception of the other person's side, and that it's not that the other side is bad or wrong or immoral or horrible. It's that we're just people with differing opinions, and how to bridge that divide, and remember that we're all still human and have some compassion. And I think that
And
love
empathy,
what
right?
and
Empathy.
empathy, yeah, being able to put that forth in leadership. And
Mm.
so having come from that emotional background that you did, and now the level of empathy that you have, how do you lead with empathy instead of emotionalism?
Well, I am very empathy. So I recently did a leadership test, and my coach said, "You're on the low scale of empathy meter." And I was like, "I am?" He's like, "You measured like low empathy." I'm like, "That's interesting, because when you talk to people that have worked for me and you line them up, they'll all say that I'm very empathetic." So I think what we gathered out of that is that I can be empathetic when I want to be empathetic,
Mm-hmm.
depending on the issue. So, case in point, my people at AvantGarde are very important to me. Therefore, when they bring an issue to me, I'm empathetic with them because they're important to me. But my husband, because we've been married 34 years, if he says, "You're not being very empathetic right now," I'm like, "Well, you're a grown ass man. We've been married 34 years. Get over it." And my empathy meter goes down with him. So my coach is like, train yourself to rise your empathy meter up and be empathetic across the board, no matter the issue you're dealing with. So I'm learning in 2024, my homework is be empathetic across the board, and not just with things that are important to me because what's important to me is not as important to that person, but maybe what's important to them is more important than what's important to me. And that goes with understanding people and learning how to have that, empathy meter. So being empathetic for me and being emotional are two different things. I can listen, and I can teach myself to listen and see things from the perspective of David's eyes, my husband, and walk in his shoes without falling apart, right? So I've learned how to eliminate the fall apart piece and be more empathetic in where he's coming from. And I think we could do that in every conversation and in every interface and relationship that we have. Is if we truly apply empathy in the way we want it applied to us, right? So put ourselves in that shoe. Do you want people to be empathetic with you when something's important to you? And if the answer is yes, then you have to dish it back.
Amen. Oh, Rebecca, I love how growth-minded you are. I love how you're still working with a coach at your level, and you're still growing and still learning. And I think that's such a testament to your success and your journey and the 7 lifetimes that you've already lived. And we'll see what others, 8, 9, 14 other lifetimes you have. I have loved our conversation so much, and I would love to shift gears into a little bit of rapid fire. Are you ready?
Okay. Yes.
Who is your favorite female character in a book or a movie, and why?
Dr. Caroline Lee, because she has so much scientific knowledge and data to the lessons she provides, and they're not just soft ideas, but they're data-driven.
Yes. What woman, alive or alive in her time, would you want to trade places with just for a day?
Elena Cardone. I would love to be Elena Cardone for a day. She's actually, she and I are going to be together next week. She's coming to Austin, but she is incredible. And a lot of people dismiss her because she's so beautiful, and she's a former model, and now she's married to a billionaire icon. But she's a woman of power within her own rank and stands alone without a grant. So I think Elena Cardone would. It'd be fun to be a day in her shoes.
And she wears some cute shoes.
She does.
What is your morning routine to set you up for a successful day?
Oh gosh, I start my morning every morning for an hour in meditation, prayer, and devotional. I have to have my quiet time to center my mind, my spirit, my brain, and it helps get me off the ground. If I lose that time, I have a completely different day.
Yes. What is the evening routine to set you up for a successful morning?
I love to cook. I'm a chef in many ways, and my husband loves to eat, so we're making a great pair. But my favorite thing is cooking with a glass of wine, and believe it or not, watching a little bit of TV with my husband. We both love. We're both news junkies, so we both love to watch the news. And just having that downtime with him is really special.
What do you define to be your queendom?
Ooh, my queendom is being able to influence and impact women and girls on their next journey. And my Girls of Legacy is a huge catalyst in that here over the course of the next few years.
And lastly, how do you crown yourself?
Well, I do a lot of self-care. I take care of RC, as many of my team refers to me as, and that's, I work out, Orange Theory, 5 days a week. I have my facials. I have, my treatments. Listen, I work really, really hard, but I also work hard to take care of me because I'm number one.
Such an important lesson, and in prioritization, no matter what level of success you're at. Rebecca, how do we find you? How do we work with you? How do we connect with you? I know everyone should go out there and get Lost Girl. It will blow your mind. This interview just scratched the surface and went deep in a few parts, but my gosh, the amount of you will see how many lifetimes Rebecca has actually lived in her book. It is extraordinary.
Well, thank you. So the best way to connect is RebeccaContreras.com and subscribe. Go to the contact page. Those subscribers come directly to me. Believe it or not, I still personally read every note that comes in. I might not get to it for a week, but I personally do it once a week. And they can also get the book online through my website or Amazon. If it comes in through the website, I can personalize it to you. And also connect with me on Instagram. I love to connect. I'm always putting out some positive context. It's at Rebecca Ann, 2 N's, Contreras. So they can find me at Rebecca Ann Contreras on Instagram. Love to hear from you.
Amazing. Rebecca, it has been my honor to have you on the Crown Yourself podcast. And as always, own your throne, mind your business, because your reign is now.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If what you heard resonated with you, be sure to subscribe and start creating a bigger impact now by sharing this with a friend. Just by doing that one simple act of kindness, you are creating a royal ripple to support more people in their sovereignty. And if you're not already following on social media, connect with me everywhere at crownyourself.now for more inspiration. I am so excited to connect with you in the next episode. And in the meantime, go out there and create a body, business, and life that rules. Because today, you crown yourself.